Over most of Earth's surface, the sea is all there is. It's unlike anything found on land. Animals that live on land cannot survive in the sea for long, just as most sea creatures cannot survive on land or in freshwater upland from the sea. Yet all life is linked to both. Even creatures living in the murky depths of the deepest oceans receive energy from organic material that drifts down from above, passed along through an endless food chain that begins where the sea meets the land. At the water's edge, plant and animal life come together in Earth's most important biosystem, the wetland. Wetlands make up a relatively small part of Earth's total surface. Only a fourth of the Earth is covered by land, and of that, wetlands comprise just 6%. Seaside wetlands, critical to the survival of most species of ocean fish, occupy less than 0.5% of Earth's surface. Wetlands include bogs, where high acid content in the wet soil sustains certain plants that occur only here. Marshes are another type of wetland, low-lying areas repeatedly inundated by flooding from rising ocean tides, rain, or snowmelt. Wetlands include swamps, areas of permanent standing water, often with tall stands of dead trees that provide specialized habitat for certain birds and other wildlife. Another wetland system is the wet meadow, open grassland rooted in saturated soil. Seldom is there standing water here, but where it lies just beneath the surface, cattails and other waterside plants find a home. All wetlands result from a variety of persistent conditions, and the degree to which those conditions fluctuate, and the degree to which the underlying soil is saturated at any given time, and for how long. Other factors include geology, the types of minerals and nutrients present, the nature of the rock and soil that underlie a particular region. Where certain conditions are persistent over time, stable plant and animal habitats occur. Plants are self-sustaining producers that collect energy from the sun and nutrients from the soil, converting them to forage for consumers. Animals, birds, fish, and insects are energy consumers that feed on plants and other consumers farther down the food chain. Eventually, these consumers return energy and nutrients to the system for recycling yet again. Microorganisms in water and soil, most so small they are invisible to the human eye, are decomposers that break down dead organic material into basic elements, allowing the process to go on indefinitely. Nowhere do producers, consumers, and decomposers interact more efficiently than in wetlands. On the ocean beach, shorebirds, willets, whimbrels, plovers, and terns, feeding on shellfish and other marine organisms. In one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth, certain plants withstand relentless sun, salt spray, and pounding waves. A clutch of American beach grass, animated by the ocean breeze, leaves a temporary trace upon the ever-shifting sand. sea oats. These tall producers put down deep roots. Sea oats hold the dune line together and provide forage for small animals and songbirds. Just behind the dune, a different habitat. Waxy-leafed pennywort and fruit-bearing yaupon provide shelter and food for a completely different collection of wildlife. A few yards further inland, shallow pools collect rainwater. Black skimmers and waders gather to feast on insects, small fish, crabs, and other marine life. Songbirds drift in and out with changes in the weather and the cycling of the seasons. In this Soundside salt marsh, cordgrass and black needle rush thrive where the sand meets the tidal flow. Egrets and tricolored herons navigate the rise and fall of this daily flood as they feed. As the tide recedes, fiddler crabs emerge to glean bits of organic material left behind. In some coastal areas, it's not clear where the sea ends and the land begins. Here, salt water mixes with fresh water from upland rivers and streams, a condition called brackish. This is a transition zone, home to yet another distinct plant and animal habitat. Some plants and animals, like this gadwall, live in both brackish and freshwater environments. Biologists have determined that many animals have special glands that filter out toxic salt. In fact, freshwater marshes and streams far from the sea often teem with birds in summer, at winter on ocean bays and brackish estuaries. In upstate New York's vast Montezuma wetland complex, a number of different wetland systems combine to sustain an extraordinary diversity of plant and animal life. This expansive marsh is a rare remnant of an ancient inland freshwater sea, Lake Iroquois, formed from glacial melting on a colossal scale. Lake Iroquois drained away thousands of years ago in a roar of water and sediment so powerful that whirlpool-shaped caverns and plunge holes were drilled into bedrock as the torrent sped eastward. At one time, Lake Iroquois covered most of central and western New York State, including lowlands that now form the eastern rim of Lake Ontario. At that time, the St. Lawrence River, a northern drainage route that serves as the modern-day outflow for the Great Lakes, was blocked by the Laurentide ice sheet. Eventually, the ice melted completely, leaving behind a huge mass of mineral and rock debris that today comprises one of the most interesting and unique geological patterns in the world. Native Americans called this region Tiohero, the River of Rushes. It is easy to see why. Montezuma is dominated by vast colonies of wetland plants that include rushes and reeds, sedges, and other vegetation. Montezuma is an immense marsh that includes pools, swamps, streams, and mudflats, each a distinct ecosystem unto itself. This complex lies at the north end of one of New York's largest and deepest lakes. It is a stopover for many species of water birds in migration, a gigantic nursery for others in summer. Herons, shorebirds, ducks, swans, and geese congregate here whenever the water is not frozen. A portion of this enormous wetland is managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as the Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge. The refuge is part of a much larger wetland system that includes hundreds of lakes, ponds, streams, marshes, swamps, bogs, and wet meadows covering thousands of square miles of upstate New York. New York's Finger Lakes were formed by glacial action that occurred 10,000 years ago at the end of the last ice age. A vast ice sheet receded from North America, depositing silt and stone that formed natural dams against runoff from the higher terrain to the south. A slight ridge in the landmass that separates the Finger Lakes from Lake Ontario underlies a vast marsh that is today the confluence of the Clyde River and Cayuga Lake watershed. This flow was tapped to feed the famous Erie Canal during the 19th century, portions of which were incorporated into the New York State Barge Canal, still in operation today. The Erie Canal was the first road west for many pioneers. Today, the New York State Thruway, a major interstate highway linking the Northeast and Midwest, follows the same route, intersecting the marsh from east to west. It will be a long time before water entering this marsh reaches the sea. The flow begins to the south in the Finger Lakes Highland, a geological formation carved by glaciers 10,000 years ago and unique in the world. The boulder-strewn floors of two of these lakes, including Cayuga at the southern end of the Montezuma Marsh, sit below sea level in a region where average terrain is several hundred feet above it. Rainwater and snowmelt, trapped among tree roots clinging to layers of porous sedimentary rock, slowly percolates into springs and creeks. Soon the flow quickens at the edge of the ridge, then drops in a thundering rush of foam and spray to the valley below. At Taughannock Falls on Cayuga's western flank, regional geology is exposed in dramatic relief. Layer upon layer of sedimentary rock, cut away by incessant stream-fed erosion. As the glacier that carved this deep fjord-like valley retreated, it left many streams hanging, creating waterfalls that over time have carved deep glens into the rock. At the base of these waterfalls are round basins that locals call punch bowls. Taughannock Creek continually retreats as erosion continues to wear away at the valley wall. The falls are now more than 1.5 miles upstream from where they were when the last ice sheet departed. Once the flow reaches dense bedrock beneath the softer sandstone overlay, its pace slows, and the powerful abrasive forces of tumbling water, sand, and mineral action dissipate. While this highland runoff does eventually drain away toward Lake Ontario, during the wettest months it collects here, in an extensive marshy environment that includes a variety of wetland subsystems. Montezuma is part of a vast holding basin, thousands upon thousands of acres of cattail, bulrush, buttonbush, and other emergent vegetation. This marsh is a massive engine, pulsing with energy from the sun, captured and stored in a huge biomass of plant material. Many wetland plants are more efficient producers than non-wetland plants. Fast-growing emergent plants like these convert energy from the sun at a rate that generates more biomass per hour than non-wetland plants exposed to the same amount of sunlight. They grow faster and retain more energy. When the season-long buildup of leaves, stems, seeds, and root material falls away at the onset of winter, migrating ducks and other waterfowl move in to forage, transforming this stored energy to their own use for the long, exhausting migration soon to come. Periodic flooding of the marsh brings in a constant supply of nutrients, and the continual presence of water keeps conditions ideal for microorganisms that break down organic materials. In fact, wetlands are natural sewage treatment plants. Biologists estimate that just 16 acres of marsh like this can filter completely all the daily organic sewage generated by 10,000 human beings. As winter comes on, this powerful engine continues to run in root systems buried under ice and snow. These plants are not dead. They are in a particular phase of a dynamic life cycle in transition between the last growing season and the next. Plants that sprout from such root systems year after year are called perennials. This vegetation undergoes chemical changes that cause leaves, stems, and other components to wither and drop away, while the root system, still very much alive, drifts into dormancy. As cold weather nears, marsh residents that cannot take wing prepare to hibernate in burrows, lodges, and the muddy substrate below the water's surface. This muskrat is preparing for winter, dragging cattails and other marshland material into a pile that will serve as a shelter from ice and wind in the days ahead. While the muskrat works on, a great blue heron perches on a nearby mound. As warm weather wanes, sunlight, no longer filtered through the gauzy haze of summer humidity, streams in at a lower angle, lengthening shadows and sharpening the contrast of autumn's brilliant color. Montezuma's main pool is a reflection of the cobalt blue November sky. Most birds travel south with a retreating sun, to wetlands where forage is still plentiful in winter. Here in the arid southwest, winter is a rainy season that brings moisture to parched arroyos and desert washes. When the water is flowing, even out of sight beneath the dry surface. There is suitable habitat for many birds that will return to northern wetlands in spring. Oak Creek, in Arizona's Red Rock Canyon region, is a perennial stream that flows year-round. In early January, mallards and common mergansers bide their time, while winter storms rage in their northern breeding grounds. Farther south, amid the giant saguaro cactus of the Sonoran Desert, scrubby stream beds ring with the chatter of songbirds in midwinter. This ecosystem, hot and dry most of the year, receives intermittent rain in winter that spawns insects and leaves pools of standing water, attracting birds and other wildlife. These riparian areas are yet another wetland ecosystem that is critical to the survival of migrating birds. In April, this desert wash explodes in color as moisture from winter rains waters plants and trees along its borders. By now, Montezuma, still subject to periodic icing and frost, is reawakening to a new season. Diving and dabbling ducks arrive before the winter ice has completely melted. Here, ring-necked ducks, northern shovelers, and blue-winged teals gather amid bloated carcasses of dead fish that did not survive the winter. These will soon disappear, consumed by muskrats, turkey vultures, and other scavengers of the marsh. What remains will quickly decompose, adding to the nutrient-rich substrate, where root systems are already well into a new season's growth. Shovelers, ring-necked ducks, and some other species of waterfowl arrive suddenly in early spring and are gone from this region by the time the summer breeding season is underway, moving north into forested swamps and marshes throughout northern Canada. This green-winged teal is feeding on tiny invertebrates sifted from mud on the shallow bottom of this pool. The green-winged teal's bill includes very fine teeth that filter morsels gleaned from the substrate. The air is still frosty at sunrise, but this marsh is rising to a new season. Hardy emergent plants are beginning to appear. Soon the dull browns and grays of winter in the northern wetland will be gone, replaced by a full spectrum of greens and yellows, followed later on by a rainbow of spectacular color as countless blooming wetland plants begin to climax in their own breeding cycles. Spring is a busy time at Montezuma. Thousands of migrants pass through on their way to vast forests, lakes, and tundra pools beyond the Arctic Circle. Some remain at Montezuma throughout the warmer months. In recent years, this marsh has become home to breeding pairs of bald eagles. This young bald eagle settles on a high perch at the edge of Montezuma's main pool to consume its prey before launching back out over the marsh on a rainy April day. Water birds often scatter when these large birds of prey fly near. Eagles are known to feed on ducks and other wetland birds, as well as fish, amphibians, and reptiles. At the edge of the pool, an American coot picks away at the remnants of last year's wetland plants, now mostly submerged. Swallows have returned to Montezuma. Rain or shine, these small passerines glide back and forth above the surface, picking off insects on the fly. Blue-winged teals. This pair may soon establish a nest in the reeds just beyond the channel. Great blue herons are opportunistic feeders with a varied diet of fish, reptiles, even small rodents. Here, one holds a 7-inch bullhead. Smaller herons would pass it up, but not the great blue. Carp, drawn from the nearby Seneca River, in a frenzy to enter the marsh to spawn. The water level of Montezuma's main pool is artificially controlled to maximize conditions for attracting and sustaining migrating ducks and other waterfowl. Its overflow drains into the Seneca River at this location. These carp will not cross into the marsh above this spillway, but most will spawn successfully in countless reedy shallows along the river and its upstream tributaries. At this time of year, the marsh is alive with the distinctive piping of the long-billed common snipe, often heard after dark and in early morning before the sun appears on the horizon. The snipe's streaked feathers create a pattern of dull color, ideal camouflage amid the muddy browns and grays of early spring in the northern wetland. For most birders, differentiating among species of shorebirds in the wetland is not easy. One help is the tendency of each to feed in predictable places at the water's edge, or just offshore. The common snipe most often prowls the weedy edges of stream banks. Other shorebirds and waders have begun to return to the region, including the greater and lesser yellowlegs, common residents of northern mudflats and stream banks in spring and summer. Snipe and yellowlegs are among more than 50 species of shorebirds and waders that reside in North America during the warmer months. Scientists believe at least some have special nerve systems at the tips of their long bills to help locate small, soft-shelled animals and insect larvae below the mud and sand surfaces of streamside banks and tidal flats. For that reason, many waders are as active feeding at night as they are in the daytime. Greater yellowlegs and lesser yellowlegs are often found together, wading in several inches of water. The yellowlegs' long bill and stilt-like legs give them the ability to probe for food and pursue small fish in deeper water than other shorebirds. On some bright spring mornings, when the sun is just beginning to lift into the sky, the distant horizon sparkles with confetti-like reflections of high-flying snow geese. Upstate cornfields and pastures host thousands of these drop-in migrants as they pause to feed on the remnants of last year's harvest. Snow geese are most often spotted in this region during spring migration. The pace of spring migration is slower, with numerous stopovers for feeding and resting. This preserves energy and lessens the physical stress for the long trip north. They have less weight to carry along in the early stages and arrive on the tundra with more stored energy than when they began. Most snow geese are white, while others have white heads and necks with dark body feathers. The two were once considered different species, but this less common blue goose has been reclassified a genetic variant of the more common white snow goose. First-year and second-year snow geese have distinctive dark color patterns. In time, these juveniles will acquire the black-tipped white wings that give snow geese in flight an elegance and grace that make them instantly recognizable from afar. These snow geese will soon begin the breeding cycle on isolated islands in the far north before returning to winter in southern coastal marshes of the continental United States. The southern migration is accomplished much faster than the northerly trek of springtime, with fewer stops to feed or rest. It will be some time before the brown marsh grasses return to their summer green, but this great egret is already back in the marsh and on the hunt. Caspian terns arrive in upstate New York at the end of April. Caspians congregate on flat, stony outcrops near open water, including man-made structures like this Lake Ontario pier. As noisy as they are social, these largest of all terns perform a distinctive courtship ritual in spring. Males fly in from the lake, small fish in their beaks, shattering the air with loud, raucous screams that draw all eyes skyward. Once on the ground, the male struts about with his catch, attracting the attention of females. It's a complex ritual in which a male may court more than one female simultaneously before handing off the fish. There is no guarantee this transfer will result in mating. Mating occurs under circumstances that appear more directly related to such factors as weather and the potential availability of multiple partners in close proximity during the courtship period. Caspian terns, like all terns and many shorebirds, are colonial nesters. They tend to congregate in migration and during the breeding cycle. Having many nests in close proximity is a countermeasure to predation. In case of colonial nesters like these Caspian terns, there truly is safety in numbers. Soon, many marsh residents will answer nature's call to nest. The The female loggerhead snapping turtle is a fearsome sight as it emerges to dig a nest hole into which to deposit its eggs. Snapping turtles have strong hind claws with which they are able to scoop out nesting holes up to 12 inches deep. Once the hole is excavated, the eggs descend in a series of drops, each cascade guided by the hind claw to assure they reach the bottom. Turtle eggs have leathery shells that resemble ping-pong balls in their round symmetry. As they reach the bottom of the nest chamber, the eggs sound hollow as they bounce off one another. When all eggs are deposited, the nest hole is covered before the turtle returns to the pond from which it emerged just a few hours earlier. Raccoons, skunks, and other nocturnal predators often raid turtle nests soon after the eggs are deposited. On the morning after this nest was established, evidence that at least some of the eggs were removed overnight. The American coot, a member of the rail family, makes use of reedy material left over from the previous growing season to build its nest. Once among the most abundant waterfowl in the region, coots experienced severe declines in the early 20th century from large-scale reduction of freshwater marshes drained for development and conversion to agricultural uses. Another member of the rail family, the common moorhen, also nests among the cattails and reedy vegetation at Montezuma. The moorhen is particular about conditions near its nest site, types of vegetation, water level, and availability of small pools. Its numbers, too, have increased in recent years. Another breeder at Montezuma is the pied-billed grebe. This small diver builds a mound from dead and emergent vegetation floating on the surface. Both male and female participate in the building of the nest and caring for the young. Throughout the breeding season, the hooting call of the pied-billed grebe rides above the marsh from morning to night. Once grebe chicks hatch, they remain atop the floating nest as parents forage beneath the surface nearby. Grebes are very secretive, quietly slipping into the water as they leave the nest, then surfacing quickly to feed the young. These nestlings, just days old, are closely watched by both adults. One chick is urged back onto the nest after following an adult into the water. On a calm day in summer, the marsh is a serenade of soft piping as hundreds of chicks call out to be fed. Nearby, a brood of older fledglings, stronger and more assertive, await the return of adults that bring small fish and other forage. The nesting coots now have their own brood. These chicks have distinctive coloring that will soon disappear as they mature. These markings make them clearly visible to the parents, but also leave them particularly vulnerable to predators. The parents corral them within the protective covering of emergent plants, away from open water. All marsh birds suffer losses to predators that include other species of waterfowl, snapping turtles, mink, fox, large fish, gulls, owls, and birds of prey like the northern harrier. Scientists estimate that between 65 and 80% of all hatchlings do not survive to adulthood, and most waterfowl do not live beyond 2 years as adults. Another increasingly common predator at Montezuma is the coyote. Coyotes are opportunists that prey on rodents and ailing and injured marsh birds unable to fly off when they approach. Without predation, the marsh would not be able to maintain the balance that sustains it. Each animal, whether predator or prey, has its place in the natural order. The common moorhen brood has also been successful. Young water birds must learn to feed themselves quickly. Before long, the sun will drift lower, a signal the time is coming to fly out of the marsh on a long journey southward. One of the most colorful marsh birds is the male wood duck. These young drakes are engaged in a wetland version of King of the Hill. The winner will have this submerged log to himself, at least for a little while. As the breeding season wanes in July, the marsh takes on a multicolored tinge as flowering plants begin to climax. Among these are the distinctive marsh rose mallow, whose pink flowers serve as a distinctive counterpoint to the green and brown of needle rush, common reed, and cattail. Water lilies float on still pools surrounded by duckweed and surface algae. Dragonflies appear in midsummer. The marsh becomes quiet, streams and pools more languid. Waterside plants and emergents have reached their full growth for the season. The natives who gave this marsh the name Tiohero, River of Rushes, long before Europeans came to the New World, would recognize many of today's wetland plants, but others would be totally unfamiliar. Over the past 4 centuries, plants brought to North America from other continents, sometimes intentionally, sometimes not, have established themselves as part of the North American landscape. One in particular, purple loosestrife, now dominates many wetlands here in upstate New York, often choking out native plants. Purple loosestrife has a flowering stalk that blooms from July through September, giving many streams and pond sides a violet hue not present in pre-colonial times. As it crowds out native vegetation, purple loosestrife impacts bird and animal habitats. Invasive plants often have no natural enemies to hold them in check the way most native species do. This allows them to expand their range unchallenged. Many birds feed on marsh plant seeds, but none feed on purple loosestrife. In an attempt to slow its progress, scientists have begun to import beetles that feed exclusively on purple loosestrife in its native Europe. There, it is just another wetland plant that does not dominate every marsh and wet meadow. Mowing only hastens its growth, as each cutting can root and quickly establish itself as a new plant. Treating it with herbicide is not an option, because purple loosestrife invariably roots near water, and using herbicide would result in stream pollution. There are upsides. Purple loosestrife is one of a very few flowering plants that blooms continually during the hottest time of the year, when other flowers have wilted from heat and late summer drought. In that way, it provides critical food for bees and flying insects that pollinate other flowering plants, including many native species. Some scientists contend that over time, this plant will become subject to parasites and diseases that eventually attack invasive species and bring them under control. Despite the fact many states have labeled it a noxious invader, purple loosestrife is still sold in nurseries and garden centers as an ornamental garden plant. Other non-native wildflowers include the delicate Queen Anne's lace, or wild carrot. This plant appears during mid and late summer almost everywhere, along roadsides, stream beds, and atop dry, weedy fields throughout North America. Another import is common mullein, used as a torch in ancient times. Roman armies dipped the bunchy bloom at the top of the stalk into pine pitch and tar, then set it afire to illuminate the night, a practical use that survived into the 19th century in North America. Viewed up close, mullein blossoms are finely patterned and short-lived, emerging and falling away in fewer than 24 hours. The widespread blue and white spotted knapweed is another common streamside plant that came ashore with immigrants of a bygone era. Still, there are plenty of native beauties that would be familiar to marsh dwellers of centuries past. Blue flag, a pondside herald of summer, is a striking combination of blues and yellows that emerges in June and is gone before the full flush of summer vegetation appears in the wetland. Marsh plants attract butterflies. Different species come by at different times throughout the blooming season, always right on schedule. Other varieties found in roadside swales and ditches attract different kinds of butterflies. Pickerel weed, an emergent found in slow-moving streams, sends up a colorful purple flower that remains in bloom from mid to late summer. The late naturalist Roger Torrey Peterson described this plant, the Cardinal Flower, as the most beloved native wildflower of North America, after polling more than 100 distinguished botanists in the 1930s. The Cardinal Flower, its scientific name Lobelia cardinalis, occurs along stream banks and in wet meadows. Hummingbirds pollinate this elegant flower. Bees and other insects are unable to navigate its complex tubular blossoms. The cardinal flower blooms well into late summer before fading into the rusty red-green backdrop of early autumn in the wetland. Late summer is a time of transition at Montezuma. The intense frenzy of nesting and fledging is over for the most part. These kingbirds wait to be fed, but soon they'll be on their own for the long migration southward. Nearby, a wren forages for nestlings in a late summer brood not yet ready to move on. Chances are an earlier brood has already left the nest. Thousands of ducks, coots, moorhens, rails, and other water birds born in this marsh in this season will soon fly out to join millions of others on the long migratory journey southward. As these birds move on, thousands more will fly in from nesting grounds far to the north. It's a vast migration that never ends, north to south and back, over and over again. Many of these migrants move along with cold fronts that bring the first chilly days and nights of the new season to the northern wetland. As the atmosphere begins to cool and sunlight dims at the approach of the autumnal equinox, a late wave of fall migration is on the wing. Passing cold air draws warmth from land, lake, and sea. Water vapor rises as fog into the early morning sky. There it forms distinctive, billowy cumulus clouds of autumn. Sometimes, when conditions are just right, this process results in a startling display of nature's raw power. Just north of the Montezuma wetland complex lies that other remnant of ancient Lake Iroquois, Great Lake Ontario. By mid-September, Ontario's surface waters have become warm from months of summer heating. Passing cold fronts disturb the balance between the warm temperature of the water and the colder temperature of the atmosphere. When that happens, the result can be a sudden appearance of waterspouts, tornado-like funnels of heated air and water vapor rising from the warm lake surface to atmosphere, where the vapor forms clouds instantly as it reaches the colder air. Often, waterspouts disappear as quickly as they appear, but occasionally the show is more spectacular and long-lived. This large waterspout churns away for several minutes above the outflow of the Oswego River, into which the bulk of relatively warm central New York and Finger Lakes region groundwater and runoff flows. On this day, a rare glimpse of nature's power to reimpose thermal balance between Earth's surface and the atmosphere. A passing seagull gets a boost on its journey eastward. Drawn into the vortex, the gull is quickly spun back out to resume its flight. Gulls, ducks, and other water birds appear to be drawn to unusual weather phenomena like this waterspout. On the water at Montezuma, a noisy, animated gathering of canvasbacks, ruddy ducks, geese, tundra swans, grebes, shorebirds, and waders. Winter's stillness is a quiet interlude that is interrupted whenever the ice melts, even for short periods. The slightest thaw can open pools soon filled with water birds that hang along the frost line, following the open water. Normal wetland environments seem to change only when nature interferes in unpredictable ways. More predictable and more controllable are real and potential effects of man-made changes to these environments. Every day at Montezuma is another step along a continuum. What this river of rushes will look like in the future, what types of plants will predominate, what types of wildlife will visit in years to come, is impossible to predict. But after decades of careful restoration and thoughtful stewardship by conservationists, naturalists, and wetland scientists, this vast marsh system is increasingly an authentic reflection of its spectacular past. If there is a window into the future, one that provides clues to the sustainability of the human ecosystem, it is the wetland. Once considered nothing more than a breeding ground for vile creatures, insects, and disease, the wetland is increasingly recognized for what it really is, a giver of life, sustainer of us all.